Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? My name's Morgan Colby. Rick's not here. I got the full-length display going on. Just tried to open my water bottle with my hand, and it was already open. Anyway, welcome to the pod. We are back. It is week 14 now of the NFL season as we hop into that Thursday night game against the New England Patriots, and the Pittsburgh Steelers will usher in week 14, the final week of the 2023 fantasy football season, or at least the regular season. And it has been an interesting season, filled with injuries, filled with poor football, and a lot of randomness from the fantasy football space. There are a lot of teams muddled in the middle. A lot of teams fighting for that same record. So, it'll be interesting to see. I think this week's going to determine a lot of fantasy playoffs, obviously. I know in the home league, there's a bunch of 5 and 8 teams. There's a bunch of 6 and 7 teams. And then there's a couple of 7 and 6 teams. And all of those teams at this point are fighting for 3 spots. So it's interesting. It's vibrant. It's been an interesting fantasy season. But as all fantasy seasons do, they have fantasy playoffs that bring them to an end. So with that being said, this is probably the most important week of your fantasy season. If you're fighting for a playoff spot, you got to get a win this week. That's all that matters. I like to say for fantasy football, all it's about is getting to the dance. Once you get there, anything can happen. As you go through the season, you try to get wins on a week-to-week basis, but you never know which team's going to get hot at the right time. You never know which team's going to score the most points at the right time, and some teams peak too early. Some teams peak too late. Some teams don't peak at all. Those teams with 3 wins in your league can peak at all. But anyway, yeah, so, a lot of stuff's going to happen in week 14. You got to get ready for the fantasy playoffs. We're going to try to get you into that position this week. As a reminder, there are no more Trade Targets episodes because the trade targets are gone. No more trades. No more trades for 2023. So that show will be back in 2024. But we do have the weekly recap and waiver wire ads for this week. Help you get prepared there. We're going to have the Thursday night preview show on Wednesday. Rick will bring that to you. As you can see, Rick's not here. And then on Thursday, Rick and I will be back together as a programming note, and we will do the starts and sits episode together, kind of give you some start-sit advice for the season. So basically, at this point, there's only 2 things you can do. Start-sits, waiver wire ads. That's about it. It's the only thing you can do to improve your team. So hopefully you got it to the position that you wanted it to before the trade deadline, because that is gone away now. All right, so on this episode, like I said, we're going to do weekly recap, waiver wire ads. Before we hop into breaking down the week, check our website, fantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platforms, please leave a review. Share this pod with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe. Click the bell for notifications, like, and comment down below. Any questions that you have for us, if you have waiver decisions that you want to make, or you want to know if you want to add a specific player or drop a specific player, we can kind of provide advice in the comments. So please leave a comment down below that best suits you. It also helps the pod. We don't ask you for money. We ask you for comments. Comments are free for you and for me. So just leave a comment, like the video, subscribe. It's really simple. All right, let's hop into some of the stuff that occurred in week 13. A lot of bad football on the East Coast. 3 wide receivers officially scored 0 this week on our busts lists. And I want to see if those guys actually performed or they got hurt, because I'm kind of curious as to why they didn't score a single fantasy point. But I know it was raining on the East Coast, a lot of running of the football, not a lot of passing, not a lot of offense going on. I went to the Patriots game versus the Chargers, and there was a total of 6 points scored in the entire game. So very challenging to see a touchdown in that one because there wasn't any. But anyway, So we're going to jump into the weekly recap, break down the top finishers and the lowest finishers at each position. We'll start with the quarterback position as we usually do, the booms and busts. The quarterback that finished number 1 overall, Geno Smith, he had 31 fantasy points this week. So he actually surprised on Thursday Night Football because Rick and I both, we did the Thursday night preview show last week, and we talked about how really it was going to be, because this game was against the Cowboys, it was going to be a challenging game for them to move the football down the field. And at the end of the day, Seattle actually had an efficient offense. I can't remember if they won the game or not because I picked Seattle to win. But let's go take a look. Let's go see. No, they lost in the last second. So I missed another pick on Thursday night. But they had a really good game, and Geno, Metcalf, really all of the Seattle Seahawks players had a really, really good day, at least ones that were startable. So you ended up with a good game for those guys if you ended up starting them. And it was kind of a surprising performance, but good for Geno finally getting on the hilt of 31. Maybe he can ride that the rest of the way. But we'll see what happens. Brock Purdy had 29.5. This guy he continues to produce. He's had some up and down moments, but he's doing pretty good right now. And then Dak Prescott continues the stretch of play. He honestly, there's always a quarterback that kind of breaks out later in drafts. Dak Prescott happens to be that guy. He was falling between round 6 and 9 in my drafts, and Dak is more than paying for that right now on the season as a whole at the quarterback position. Dak Prescott is QB3 with 260 fantasy points. So, he has been lighting up the field and having a really good season. If you drafted him in the later rounds, you ended up with a gem. But anyway, the bust this week, Justin Herbert had 8 points. Like I said, rain on the East Coast. He never really does well against the Patriots defense. So he gets 8. He busts out, really kills your team if you started him. I know a team that was fighting for the playoffs ended up losing this week because of that. Kyler Murray had 11.8. So if you started Kyler Murray, they did win the football game though. Patrick Mahomes had 14. So there's a larger conversation to be had about Mahomes because Mahomes is right now QB8 on the year with 230 fantasy points, and he has had 20, 22, 25, 15, 19, 18, 34, 7, 15. So after that 34-point game in week 7, he's had 7, 15 bye week, 17, 20, 14. So he has not been a high-end performing quarterback in fantasy football. He has kind of been in the range of low-end QB1, maybe a QB2 at this point, going from those weeks. I want to pace that out just to see weeks 8 to 13. So let's do that. He currently would place out at QB 18 in fantasy football from weeks 8 to 13 right now. So he's on a cold spell. So I just keep an eye on that. He does have Buffalo coming up, which is a tough matchup for quarterbacks. He has New England, which is, we'll see if the Patriots can stop him, but at that point, maybe they don't care. Then the Raiders, that's probably going to be an easy game. Cincinnati's probably going to be, a little bit tougher. So we'll see what happens with Mahomes here at the end of the season. It'll definitely be interesting, though, to see if he can continue. But he busts this week at 14 points, so doesn't really have the best week. Let's move to the running back booms. We have Derrick Henry with 29.7. So this guy either does nothing or he does everything. But you can definitely tell Derrick Henry is starting to fade off into the sunset here. It feels like definitely it's going to be his last year of high-end efficiency at the running back position. Almost feels like Zeke's final year. So, he did produce for you this week, but I don't know if it's going to continue into the future. Joe Mixon had 28.9 on Monday Night Football. He scored 2-3 touchdowns in the game, and he was their whole offense. So if you have Joe Mixon in the game, congratulations. And then Alvin Kamara, who has been a little bit of a good player here. He's kind of surprising. Everyone, right now the expert consensus has, Austin Eckler up there, and they continue to have him and leave him at 4, 5, or 6, even though he's had 3 horrible, atrocious games. Since Alvin Kamara has gotten back, he has been, right now, he is the RB4 on the season. And he's had 21, 18, 17, 29, 27, 11, 18, 15, and 28. So since week 4, realistically, weeks 4 to 13 here, at the running back position, Alvin Kamara is RB3. So Alvin Kamara is back. Like, he's been around. Yet, the expert consensus rankings don't have him as high as some of these other running backs, and I just don't get it. At this point, Kamara is one of the best running backs in fantasy football, and you kind of have to roll him out there. Because, like, the expert consensus rankings right now, if I look at them on my playbook right now, have him rest of season at running back 11. I just don't get it. He's the RB4 in the season. So move him up your rankings, guys, because I think Alvin Kamara is pretty good. Bust at the running back position, we had Ramondre Stevenson with 2.9. He got hurt in the middle of the game. He actually looked pretty good in the early portion of it, but he got hurt at that point. DeAndre Swift had 4. That was more like game script. They couldn't really run the ball. And then, the touchdowns, obviously, when you get to the goal line, are going to go straight to the tush push. They did the tush push on the 5-yard line. I mean, they don't give a frick anymore. They ran it twice. And then Austin Eckler has 4.7. There's like I was just saying with Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler. Eckler's now had 3 bad weeks. He does have an easy rest of season schedule, but I don't really know what the strategy here is for Eckler for fantasy football. I honestly, like, if I had Eckler, I would pull a wait and see and just see if, Austin Eckler is the dude. I just don't know where to go with him. You know what I mean? Because it's at this point, if he continues to have these 7-8 point games, it's going to hurt you. So I just don't know if there's an opportunity and you haven't passed your deadline, it might be a good idea to trade him at this point. I know we said buy last week, but this was before this bad game, and I just don't know how to feel about it. Rick's going to, go off on Thursday probably about that. But let's move to the wide receiver booms. Metcalf, like I said, 37.4, so Seattle has a really good game. Deebo Samuel, man, that guy was all over the field. He scored like 3 touchdowns just on his sheer ability to make plays after the catch and rush. And he's just a monster. A little early for these big games, but I like it from Deebo. And then Nico Collins at 34.1. Nico has got to be like the biggest ad in fantasy football that I can think of at this point, because like with Tank Dell out, who we'll talk about in a second, some interesting stuff is happening. Nico is now going to be the featured wide receiver on this team at this point. And I just like the way he's been performing, the way he's been playing on the season. Nico Collins needs to be on your team for the rest of season, especially if I've been waiting for what's called the rookie wall. You know what I mean? The rookie quarterback wall that they hit at the end of the season. Usually I'm looking for that, but it doesn't look like Stroud's going to hit it. And if he doesn't hit it, then, man, you have a really good wide receiver on your hands. He's a wide receiver 1 on the season so far. Top 12 guy. So, and he missed a week. So it's like, he's had some really explosive weeks. He's an exciting player to have. I would try to get Nico Collins on your team at any costs if possible. But he's been fantastic. Let's talk about some wide receiver busts. Tank Dell hurt his leg. He's going to be out for the rest of the year, which sucks. We obviously wanted to see Tank have some success down the stretch of the season, but we also got some other burgers because, Tank scored 0. But you also got an 82% snap percentage over here from Terry McLaurin. 3 targets, no catches for 0 fantasy points. And then to top it all off, another guy finishes with 0, and it's Marquise Brown. Brown, who played, I believe it, just to confirm, because I need to look at these numbers, because I was like, does this guy even play? He played 53% of the snaps, so I believe, I don't think the game script was positive for him, and he left the game, and he was questionable. He only had 3 targets as well, and didn't catch a single pass, so he had 0 catches. All 3 of these guys bust out in your lineups. And obviously you can't do anything about Tank Dell because he did get hurt. But Terry McLaurin and Marquise Brown going out in your lineups and getting 0, that's not good. So I don't know what to do with those guys, and I don't know if it's going to continue, but that scares me a little bit moving forward, especially if you've been starting these guys. Let's move to the tight end boom position. We got Sam Laporta with 29 fantasy points, so he pops off again. He's definitely a top 3, top 4 tight end in fantasy football rest of season. Evan Engram has 23.2, so he has a really good week. And then Trey McBride, who's come on a little bit later in the season here, has been popping off as well. He ends up with 22.9, I think, and since week 10, he's had 21, 9, 13, 22. So he's had some really good games, and he even had a 25-point game in week 8. So, at this point, he's kind of moving up a little bit in the standings and in the ranks. He's tight end 8 right now. So just keep an eye on Trey McBride. I think some good things are coming for him. And if he's on your waiver wire, what are you doing? Snatch him up. Tight end busts this week. Logan Thomas, if you started him, had 2, so not good. That Commanders game was a disaster. Ever since everyone was like, Sam Howell's here to stay, he's really good, guys. Logan Thomas and Terry McLaurin and Sam Howell, and everyone sucks on that team. So David Njoku had 3.7 points this week. Didn't have a good performance. And then Tyler Higbee, who we said to sit this week, had 5.5. So some busts at the tight end position, as always. But they're your booms and busts for this week. Very interesting week with some explosive players. The 49ers, huge stuff. Seattle, huge stuff. Everyone else, not really great besides maybe that Texans game. Seems like the dome games were doing okay, and the games that didn't have rain. But they're the rain games, dude. Terry McLaurin in the rain. Marquise Brown, I believe he was in the dome, so he just straight up friggin' was butt. But either way, those are your booms and busts on the week. Interesting week, but, fun stuff to go over. Let's move to what you came here for, which is the waiver wire ads for the week. Now, there's some interesting guys that I think we should consider at different positions. So we'll go to, as we always do, go to Sleeper and go to the trending tab and kind of break down what that information may look like, starting with the QBs. So last night, I watched some Thursday night. Not Thursday night football. I watched some Monday Night Football, and Trevor Lawrence went down, and you also have Jake Browning. Both those guys did CJ Beathard in the time that he had. Completed 9 passes, 63 yards. Didn't really do much in the time he had in the game, but. Beathard's not a guy I want on my team. You know what I mean? He's not a guy I want starting or on my roster. So I just straight stay away from him. If you're seeing him on the rostered section, Mitch Trubisky on Thursday Night Football against the Pats D, that's not a good idea either. So I just don't think you should roll out Mitch against that team. And there's nothing there to be envied for me at the quarterback position for those two guys. Then you also saw Jake Browning go off and get 27 fantasy points against Jacksonville in overtime, 354 yards, 1 touchdown. While I don't think Indianapolis is going to be an extremely difficult matchup, I don't think he's a good play either. So these backup quarterbacks coming in, Trubisky, CJ Beathard, Jake Browning, like those guys, you can probably leave out of your starting lineups this week and move on. But some guys that I think you should definitely add. Jordan Love's back. He's back in fantasy football. He's had some really good weeks since week 10. So if you haven't added him, which it looks like 40% of you haven't, he's rostered in 60% of sleeper leagues. He had 20, 22, 29, 26. That's in an extrapolated 5-point touchdown league. But he's had some really good performances. So you want to get him rostered on your team before it's too late. But he is rostered in 64% of leagues, so he's probably not available. A guy who's been an interesting streaming option is Josh Dobbs. He has Las Vegas this week, who's not a good pass defense, and then Green Bay at the end of the season. So, like, if you at week 17, if you make it that far, so there's some good games in here for Dobbs, but nothing too great. Stafford did have a good week this week, getting 22 fantasy points, so he put up a good game, but he doesn't have an easy. He's Washington and the Giants at the end of the year. Playoff schedule looks okay, so if you want to add Stafford, you can maybe do it if you don't have a quarterback, but outside of that, I don't know that I want to add anyone else. I know Gardner Minshew had an okay day, 18 fantasy points, but I have no interest in that. And stay away from Joe Flacco, please, for the love of God. Don't pick up Joe Flacco. But those are the quarterbacks. Let's move to the running back position. This is going to get interesting. Now, I don't believe in the Patriots offense whatsoever. They faced one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL and one of the worst rush defenses in the NFL in the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers don't have a good defense. and they couldn't move the ball, and they couldn't score a single point. And I can't remember. They brought up a stat. I think it's been like 5 to 7 years since the last time the Chargers were able to shut out a team. So not good for the New England Patriots. But I do think Zeke is an interesting add. He's rostered in 46% of leagues. And when Ramondre Stevenson went down, he got 5 targets, 4 catches, 17 rushes for 52 yards. Obviously, no scoring upside. But, if he pops a touchdown in once or twice here at the end of the season, there might be some good opportunities for Zeke. I just don't know if the Patriots can score more than 7 to 10 fantasy points. 7 to 10 NFL points. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But, it is kind of interesting to see what happens. I think Zeke's a good pickup because of the opportunity that he's going to get in these games. They don't have another running back to turn to. Realistically, I don't know who they're going to put in the game, and with Stevenson out rest of season, basically Zeke's going to be the guy. He came off the injury report, so he's ready to go for Thursday Night Football. So if you want to pick him up, I don't think he's a good play against Pittsburgh or KC, but against Denver and Buffalo, he might be an okay match. I would add him now, though, just as a depth piece, and he's, as a guy who's going to get more opportunity. So I think he's okay to add. Tajay Spears, definitely 46% rostered. He needs to be added on your roster. At this point in the year, we always talk about this. Handcuffs they have to be rostered. So if you have Tyler Allgeier available, if Tajay Spears is available, like some of these handcuffs, you got to go at them, because if somebody gets hurt in the postseason, you want to take advantage of that, especially if you don't have a lot of depth at a certain position. On my home league fantasy team, I have a weak spot at the second running back slot. Everything else is good except for a second running back. So I need to take a look at that second running back and make sure that that person's ready to go. And if somebody like, Bihan were to go down, Tyler Allgeier becomes an instant, RB, not an instant RB1, but a guy that can take, the workload. We know what he looked like last year with that workload. So, when he does take that workload, if he gets red zone opportunities, it could turn into a really good pickup. Same thing with Tajay Spears. The things I'm seeing from Tajay Spears on the season in terms of efficiency, he's averaging basically 5 yards a carry. He has 33 catches for 192 yards. So the efficiency through the air is not great, but he is getting a lot of opportunity on this team. And it's like, if he were to start rushing the ball a little bit more, if Derrick Henry were to go down, you want to make sure you have Tajay Spears on your roster. So anybody that's a handcuff you want to get. I'll highlight one more guy that I think you should add, because I think just some other guys like Chuba Hubbard, for whatever reason, has been getting an increase in snap percentage. He has 20 and 22 the last couple weeks. So I don't know if things like that are going to continue for Chuba, but I would roster him. He is rostered in 70% of leagues, so I don't see him being somebody that you can add. The other guys, Keaton Mitchell is a guy that I keep my eye on. He is rostered in 55% of leagues, and I'd go add him if possible. But the main guy that I want to add is Roschon Johnson. I don't know if things are going to get more efficient for him or better for him, but this week he had 74% snap percentage with a completely healthy Khalil Herbert. He had 5 catches and 10 rushes. And the efficiency wasn't great. He had 35 yards on the ground on 10 rushes, 3.5 yards a carry, and he had 40 yards through the air, which is actually pretty efficient. But the main thing that I want to note is that he took the snap percentage away from Roschon Johnson. So this is a running back who's a rookie who has now taken the full-time work from Roschon, went into the bye week, right? And now he's coming out against Detroit. If he maintains the workload over Khalil Herbert, you want to make sure this guy's rostered on your team, because this could be one of those players at the end of the season that kind of gets a good stretch of games. So I'd add Roschon. I think that's my add. Him, Ezekiel Elliott, those two guys are my ads of the week. And then obviously go pick up your handcuffs and make sure if there's handcuffs on the waiver wire, go pick them up. Wide receiver. All right, let's talk about some wide receivers. Parker Washington, I don't want anything to do with. Everyone's all hyped up about Parker Washington. 6 catches, 61 yards, 1 touchdown, 18 fantasy points. Has a really good week this week. I don't think anything's going to continue with this guy. CJ Beathard's probably going to start moving forward if something is really, 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 really wrong with Trevor Lawrence. Because of those things, I don't think Parker Washington becomes a really, really good ad in fantasy football. So I'd avoid Parker Washington if possible. There isn't a lot at the wide receiver position that I'm super excited about, but I would add some guys that are young and talented. So Jonathan Mingo is the first guy that I would add. He's a rookie. There hasn't been a lot of efficient production for him, but over the last 4 weeks, he's had 7, 6, 6, and 10 targets. So he's been averaging about 7 targets a game, which is pretty good. This week he had 12 fantasy points. Last week he had 10. So, something's building for Jonathan Mingo. You want to make sure you have rookies on your team that are building towards something as snap percentages increase. And he's really been on the all cardio team and hasn't really had a lot of efficiency. But there's something here for this kid. He's been getting targeted. He's been getting opportunity. So, if he continues to get targeted down the stretch 8, 9, 10 times a game, you want to make sure you have this guy rostered on your team. So Mingo's a good add this week if you don't have him. I would say a guy that you really have to get on your roster is Noah Brown. Considering when one of the two, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, were out, he had 27 and 24. This is a guy you got to pick up. I don't know if you're going to start him this week. I don't know if you can start him. He is going up against the Jets. It's not great. Then he has Tennessee, Cleveland, Tennessee. So there's some interesting games down the stretch here for Noah Brown, but he is an interesting add because of that stretch of games where he went off when he was given the opportunity. Now, I would say the guy that I would add instead of Noah Brown, if you don't have that option, is Robert Woods. Or is it Robert Woods? Yes, Robert Woods. So Robert Woods has decreased in efficiency and decreased in snap percentage. He only played 47% of the snaps this week. He didn't see a target, despite what's his name being hurt. This is a deeper add, so if you have roster space and you want to add one of the Texans wide receivers, just in case, you can add this guy. But the main guy that I would add at the wide receiver position is Noah Brown from Houston, because you get him on your team if he starts having those boom games like he did middle of the season, because I think it was Nico Collins at the time. I can't remember which guy was out, but because that guy was out, you might get those explosion games from time to time from Noah Brown. So you want to make sure that guy's rostered on your team. He is rostered in 50% of leagues, so just be careful with that. But Mingo, Noah Brown, those two guys, I'd roster. Outside of that, I would. If he's available, I'd probably add Romeo Doubs. But outside of that, there's not a lot of guys that are really fully available at this point for me. So that is the wide receiver position. And then quickly, let's bounce through the tight end position and send you on your merry way. Likely has to be rostered if he hasn't been rostered yet. He went on his bye week this week. He only got really one performance without Mark Andrews, and he had 8 points. So haven't really seen a lot, but he's a guy that you have to add. He is, coming off his bye week going into the Rams game. So should be interesting to see what happens there. Another guy that I would go out and check on your waiver wire, Taysom Hill. This is a guy who, it could not work on a week. It really could. But since week 6, he has had 12, 16, 22, 22, 4, 8, and 15. That would make him, through that stretch of time, week 6 to 13, it would make Taysom Hill a top five tight end in fantasy football. So while I don't think he's going to be this elite tight end ad that you want to get on your roster, I think Taysom has opportunity to really do some explosive things. And I think it's exciting to see where things are going. Now, this week he had 15 fantasy points, only had 2 catches for 15 yards, and didn't really have, he only had 2 catches for 15 yards, but he had rushing in the game, which was really interesting. So because of that, it gave him a really good week. He scored a rushing touchdown, all that stuff. So you want to Taysom Hill's a good ad. I think Taysom Hill can be your fantasy tight end down the stretch of the season if you need one. But he's rostered in 66% of the leagues, so it's going to be tougher to get him. Outside of that, there's just not a lot of tight ends I wanna go out and add. There's a lot of guys out there that are getting added. But yeah, so that's the tight end position. So there you go. There are all the waiver wire ads for the week. There's the weekly recap. All of this fun stuff. It's been an interesting season, guys. We got one more week of the regular season. Got to get you in the fantasy playoffs. Once you're there, we're going to ride to a fantasy championship. Rick has got you the Thursday Night Football preview, Patriots Steelers. So be sure to check that out on the next episode. See you later, guys. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.